Hare Krishna. Ram Sindhu Prabhu, would you like to begin with Kirtan?
Okay, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna.
What's happening?
Krishna. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible for me. Guru Maharaj,
Alright.
is there something wrong with the audio? I'll send a message in the chat.
Okay, I'll keep singing. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna.
Om Srimad Panamansa Pariprajaka Stotra Sri Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sekaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kund Radha Kundagiri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Tham Ki Jai Navadvip Tham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.
Welcome everybody to Srimad Bhagavatam with His Holiness Jayādvaita Swami. It is Monday, October 6th, 2025. Today we're beginning with Srimad Bhagavatam 4:22-26. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. For logistics, Saraswati Machi, are you available to take the chat when I leave? I need to drop off early today.
Yes.
Thank you. Guru Maharaj, are you wanting to read our first text?
I wouldn't mind if someone else began reading.
Okay, I'll begin. Okay. 4:22-26. Yada ratir Brahmani Naistiki Puman Acharyavan Jnana Viraga Brahmasa Dahati Aviryam Hridayam Jiva Kosam Panchatmakam Yonim Epotito Ni. Translation. Upon becoming fixed in his attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by the grace of the spiritual master and by awakening knowledge and detachment, the living entity, situated within the heart of the body and covered by the five elements, burns up his material surroundings exactly as fire, arising from wood, burns the wood itself. Purport. It is said that both the Jivatma, the individual soul, and the Paramatma live together within the heart. In the Vedic version, it is stated, Vriddhi ayam atma, the soul and supersoul both live within the heart. The individual soul is liberated when it comes out of the material heart or cleanses the heart to make it spiritualized. The example given here is very appropriate. Yoni ivotito ni. Agni, or fire, comes out of wood, and by it the wood is completely destroyed. Similarly, when a living entity increases his attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is to be considered like fire. A blazing fire is visible by its exhibition of heat and light. Similarly, when the living entity within the heart becomes enlightened with full spiritual knowledge and detached from the material world, he burns up his material covering of the five elements, earth, water, fire, air, and sky, and becomes free from the five kinds of material attachments, namely ignorance, false egoism, attachment to the material world, envy, and absorption in material consciousness. Therefore, Panchatmakam, as mentioned in this verse, refers to either the five elements or the five coverings of material contamination. When these are all burned into ashes by the blazing fire of knowledge and detachment, one is fixed firmly in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and advances one's attraction for Krishna by the spiritual master's instructions, the five coverings of the living entity cannot be removed from the material heart. The living entity is centered within the heart, and to take him away from the heart is to liberate him. This is the process. One must take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, and by his instruction increase one's knowledge in devotional service, become detached from the material world, and thus become liberated. An advanced devotee, therefore, does not live within the material body, but within his spiritual body, just as a dry coconut lives detached from the coconut husk, even though within the husk. The pure devotee's body is therefore called Chinmaya Sarira, spiritualized body. In other words, a devotee's body is not connected with material activities, and as such, a devotee is always liberated. Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14:26. Srila Rupa Goswami also confirms this. Iha yasya harer dasya karmana manasa gira nikhilasa api avastasu jivan mukta sa uchyate. Whatever his condition may be, one who is engaged fully with his body, mind, and speech in the service of the Lord is liberated, even within this body. Guru Maharaj and others, would you like to comment?
Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurn Miditam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapisam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadhati Shaktantika Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Jatapadakamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Shagrajatam Shahagana Raganatan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savatutam Rijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lolita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prashabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Puripriye Vanchakolpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Pyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yadaratir Brahmani Naishtaki Puman Acharjavan Jnana Viraga Ranghasa Sahatya Viryam Hridayam Jivakosham Panchatmakam Yonim Ivoti Togni. It's interesting to see where Srila Prabhupada has clarified or amplified some of the Sanskrit words here. Yadavratir Brahmani Naishtaki Puman, where when one has attachment, Brahmani, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not to the impersonal Brahma. We remember from the previous verse that wherever we, or a previous verse, that wherever we see Brahman, we can read Krishna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said this. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan Iti Shabjite. Ultimately, the Supreme Brahman is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Param Brahma Param Dhama Pavitram Paramam Bhavan. Arjuna told Lord Krishna, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When one's mind becomes fixed, one's attachment becomes fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And Acharyavan, Acharya means the spiritual master, and Vat, one who has. So Acharyavan is literally a person who has a spiritual master. But in the word for word, Acharyavan, completely surrendered to the spiritual master. Completely surrendered to the spiritual master. That's Acharyavan, not just having a spiritual master. Yes, I also have a guru. But Acharyavan means completely surrendered. Acharyavan. So by virtue of being Acharyavan and also Jnana Vairagya Ram Jnana Viraga Ranghaksa, by the force of Jnana, knowledge and detachment, Dahati Aviryam Hridayam Jiva Kosham, the coverings of the Jiva, the living entity, become avirya, powerless, within the heart. And Dahati Panchatmakam Yonim Ivotitogni, they burn up the fivefold covering, fivefold Jiva Kosha, the way that fire burns up the wood from which it's from which it proceeds. Then Srila Prabhupada explains these fivefold coverings. It seems from his purport that there's two ways, but one way he explains, the other is not fully explained, although we'll find the explanation in the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. The five coverings can be earth, water, fire, air, and ether. They're fivefold living coverings of the living entities. I also thought of Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya. Kam, lust, anger, greed, madness, Moha, illusion, and envy, Matsarya. The Atma and the Paramatma live within the heart, but the living entity comes out of the material heart, means he becomes separated from the heart. Separated doesn't mean he's removed to some far location, but he knows, I'm not this body. He becomes detached from the false identity with this body. Or Prabhupada explains that the heart becomes spiritualized. And so in that way, he comes out of the material heart and spiritualizes the heart. I'm sorry, I thought that the five, Prabhupada had explained only one reading of the five kinds of material attachments. But no, he does specify the other way of looking at it. Ignorance, false ego, attachment to the material world, envy, and absorption in material consciousness. These are the five. So either the five elements or these five coverings, the living entity becomes free from them. And then one becomes fixed firmly in devotional service. And Prabhupada says, unless one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and advances one's attraction for Krishna by the spiritual master's instructions, the five coverings of the living entity cannot be uncovered from the material heart. One must take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and by his instruction increase one's knowledge in devotional service, become detached from the material world, and thus become liberated. And Prabhupada gives the example of being Jivan Mukta, Iha Yasya Harir Dasye Karmana Manasa Gira Nikalashvapyavastasu Jivan Mukta Suchate. Even in the material world, while in the material world, the devotee is liberated as a coconut shell, a coconut pulp dried up, becomes separated from the shell. If you shake the shell, you'll hear the coconut rattling around inside because it's now become separated from the shell. When the living entity becomes Krishna conscious, he becomes separated from the body even while in the body. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has a commentary. Then what happens? One who has devotion to Guru Acharyavan, burns up the powerless Aviryavan, subtle body composed of ahankar, covering kosham, covering the ahankar, covering kosham, the jiva, by the influence of Gyan and Vairagya. Let's read that again. By the influence of Jnana and Vairagya, which have arisen by attachment to the Lord, one who has devotion to Guru Acharyavan burns up the powerless but subtle body composed of ahankar, covering, kosham. That subtle body is composed of 5 kleshas: ignorance, ego, attachment, hatred, and absorption, fear of death. Just as fire arising from the kindling stick burns the stick, attachment for the Lord, which arises in the material subtle body, intelligence, and senses, burns up the subtle body. Logical structure should be: one burns up the subtle body by attachment to the Lord, just as one burns up wood by fire. Hare Krishna. Are there some questions or comments others than mine?
I have a question.
Mm.
Sometimes the emphasis is given on chanting as a very important process for liberating the soul from the material elements, and here the emphasis is given on a dedication to the spiritual master. So, wondering if you have any comments on those two things and how they work together. Or
Dedication to the spiritual master means that I'll be dedicated to the instructions of the spiritual master. So not that I'm dedicated to the spiritual master, Guruji, I'm dedicated to you, but I won't do what you say. Real devotion means that if I'm devoted, I'll do what you say. So the spiritual master instructs the disciple, chant Hare Krishna. And by chanting, the living entity becomes purified. So there, it's not contradictory. Is that all right?
yeah, does that mean that chanting has potency because it's the instructions of the spiritual master?
No, the chanting has potency anyway. It always has potency. But the spiritual master is the one who tells me, chant Hare Krishna. And that potency is realized by the grace of the spiritual master, by the grace of the holy name itself, and by the grace of the spiritual master. Therefore, Yasya Deve Parabhakti Yatadeva Tataguru. One who has full faith in Krishna, the holy name of Krishna, and equal faith in the spiritual master. Tasyaite Katitayarta Prakashante, to such a person, everything is revealed. Is that okay?
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. We have a hand from Shamsindhu Prabhu. Saraswati Machi, can you take the chat from now on? And you can take the next text after Shamsindhu Prabhu reads. Is that okay?
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj and Dandavats. I had a
Hare Krishna.
question
Yes.
regarding surrendering to the Guru. I was reading something in Lilamrit that I found interesting, where I think Srila Prabhupada wanted a devotee named Gunarnava to set up a pulley system, I think in Vrindavan. They were trying to get the whole belt thing working, and it was like a big nightmare. And there's a particular line about Gunarnava having trouble surrendering to a particular instruction, and he did something Prabhupada didn't want. Prabhupada got very upset, and I was thinking about this situation where we have difficulty surrendering to particular instructions. we can't make advancement unless we surrender to the instructions of the guru. But sometimes, for some reason, there's just something they ask and you just can't do it. So what is the cause of this, and how do we get over it so that we can, please the guru and make further progress?
Interesting question. What's the cause of our being unwilling or unable? It's hard to pinpoint what, to settle up on a particular cause, especially for a particular instance. Guru Nanak Prabhu is still engaged in Srila Prabhupada's service, and so he's not a faithless, a person weak in faith who was tottering on the edge of leaving. Sometimes that may be the problem, that I don't have faith in the spiritual master. So when some instruction comes that's contrary to my material faith, I bail. The example is there of the devotee who couldn't believe Prabhupada's statement that they didn't go to the moon. How is it possible? He had strong faith in scientific version, so much so that it was hard to place faith in what Prabhupada had said. So sometimes it may be that sort of situation, competing faith between my acquired faith in material energy or some particular story woven by the material energy, and faith in the words of the spiritual master or words of the Shastra. Prabhupada concluded by saying, I can understand how he wouldn't believe my version, but it was the version of Shastra. And so sometimes there's not enough faith in the Guru or faith in the Shastra. And for that reason, one really doesn't have faith in the instruction. We don't think that the spiritual master really knows what he's doing or what he's about, or we doubt that he does, we're not sure. One, of course, could just be false. He doesn't really have faith at all, and he's just making a show, but he's not willing to make a show on this account or that account. That would be another possibility. Pretty adorable, weakness of heart in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is telling Arjuna to fight, and Arjuna says, Nayotsya, no, I won't fight, I can't fight. And Krishna says it's pretty adorable, weakness of heart. That weakness of heart. Or what is that contamination? In the Bhagavad Gita also. Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samapastitam. How has this contamination come upon you? Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samapastitam. So there may be different reasons, but we should, we're urged to overcome these obstacles or hesitations or other kinds of unwillingness, which are manogatan, products of the mind. Here we find that this whole, these 5 coverings are products of the subtle body, material mind, and by the force of Krishna consciousness, those subtle coverings are to be burnt to ashes. So in this way, by strong faith in the words of the spiritual master, one can get free from these coverings. One whose faith is weak will have a more difficult time. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Shamsundu.
Pranams Param Pujya Guru Maharaj and all the Vaishnavas. There's I think it's a question in the chat box, or it might be a comment, I'm not sure. If I cannot follow the instructions right away because I don't have enough spiritual maturity, it just takes time?
Yeah, or sometimes it's the circumstance also. The question makes me remember that Prabhupada was given the instruction to spread Krishna consciousness in English. And he wrote later that he wasn't really able to do it, but he was always keeping that instruction in his heart. He didn't reject the instruction. He didn't conclude that the instruction was impossible or that he wouldn't do it. But somehow, some obstacle is there now. But in the future, I have to do it. So that may be there also, that some obstacle, the material energy presents some obstacle. I'm told to visit some country, spread Krishna consciousness in that country, and then war breaks out there, or security is heightened, and it becomes difficult to go. So I may not go now, but still I remember that Guru Maharaj told me to go there. So sooner or later I have to do it when the war subsides, when security is slackened somewhat, then I'll go. And not that I just put everything aside and say, well, yeah, it's not really. No, somehow I should try to do it. Hare Krishna.
We're on text 27. Guru Maharaj, would you like to read that text?
Okay. Dagdhashyo mukta samastata guno navatmano bahir antar vichashte paratmanor yad vyavadhanam purastat swapne yata purushastat vinashe. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there's no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. Purport. As described by Srila Rupa Goswami, Anyabhilashita Shunyam, one must be devoid of all material desires. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires, there's no longer need for speculative knowledge or fruitive activities. In that condition, it is to be understood that one is free from the material body. The example is already given above. A coconut which is dry is loosened from its outward husk. This is the stage of liberation. As said in Srimad Bhagavatam, mukti means swarupena vivastiti, being situated in one's own constitutional position. All material desires are present as long as one is in the bodily concept of life. But when one realizes that he's an eternal servant of Krishna, his desires are no longer material. A devotee acts in this consciousness. In other words, when material desires in connection with the body are finished, one is actually liberated. When one is liberated from the material qualities, now let's see, this is a long purport. Of course, what we may be waiting for as we read the purport is Prabhupada's explanation of how the soul is not different from the super soul. We read again and again that the soul and the super soul are distinct. And yet here we see that this distinction is illusory. When one wakes up from a dream, then the difference between the dream and the dreamer disappears. So the living entity is not different from the super soul. And it's just a question of waking up and seeing this. So we may naturally have an interest in knowing how there's no difference. And we've heard so often that there is a difference. So that discussion is coming. When one is liberated from the material qualities, he does not do anything for his personal sense gratification. At that time, all activities performed by him are absolute. In the conditioned state, there are two kinds of activities. One acts on behalf of the body, and at the same time, he acts to become liberated. The devotee, when completely free from all material desires or all material qualities, transcends the duality of action for the body and soul. Then the bodily concept of the bodily concept of life is completely over. Therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami says, Iha yasya harer dasye, Iha yasya harer dasye, karmana manasa kira, nikalashvatasu, jivan mukta suchate. When one is completely fixed in the service of the Lord, he is a liberated person in any condition of life. He is called Jivan Mukta, liberated even within the body. In such a condition, liberated condition, there's no distinction between actions for sense gratification and actions for liberation. When one is liberated from the desires of sense gratification, he has no longer to suffer the reactions of lamentation or illusion. Activities performed by the karmis and gyanis are subject to lamentation and illusion, but a self-realized liberated person, acting only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, experiences none. This is the stage of oneness, or merging into the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This means that the individual soul, while keeping his individuality, no longer has separate interests. He is fully in the service of the Lord, and he has nothing to do for his personal sense gratification. Therefore, he sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not himself. His personal interest completely perishes. When a person comes out of a dream, the dream vanishes. While dreaming, a person may consider himself a king and see the royal paraphernalia, his soldiers, etc. But when the dream's over, he does not see anything beyond himself. Similarly, A liberated person understands that he's part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, acting in accordance with the desire of the Supreme Lord. And as such, there's no distinction between himself and the Supreme Lord, although both of them retain their individuality. Nityo nityanam chaitanas chaitanam. This is the perfect conception of oneness in relation to the Supersoul and the soul. The liberated living entity has no separate interest. Even his material desires, so-called material desire, or his desire for sense gratification, becomes one with the desire of the Lord. He doesn't desire separately, oh, I need sense gratification. It's only enough just to keep the body and soul together. He eats for the service of Krishna. He sleeps for the service of Krishna. He does everything for the service of Krishna. So where's the separate interest? He has no interest apart from the interests of Krishna. This is the liberated person. The less advanced person has some separate interest to be fulfilled. But the pure devotee is totally one in interest with the Lord. Let's see. Here's a commentary by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Then what happens? When the subtle body has been destroyed, the person freed of all its effects, such as identifying himself as the doer, no longer sees sense objects for pleasure, but he, or the self, Atmana, or lamentation, illusion, and other internal effects. He no longer sees the obstacles between the Paramatma and Atma that previously existed. In other words, he sees the Paramatma with no obstacles, just as one does not see what one saw in the dream when one wakes up from a sleeping condition. Hare Krishna.
Guru Maharaj, I have a question where they talked about the difference between the soul and the super soul that was previously existing, but after self-realization that is annihilated. So my question is, does the super soul that we know that's a plenary portion of Kshirodakshai Vishnu, does that only accompany a jiva tattva only in the material creation? So in other words, in the spiritual world, for a liberated soul, there is no Paramatma accompanying them, supervising everything that they're doing, knows everything, all their desires, etc.
But there's no existence of the Paramatma in the spiritual world. The Paramatma is the expansion of the Lord Vishnu, and Lord Vishnu is only expanded for creation in the material world. So that Paramatma is no longer there, but Yam Sham Sundaram Achintya Guna Swarupam Hridayeshu Vilokayanti. He sees Krishna present within his heart. It's not that in the material world, Krishna knows everything about my desires or my heart. But in the spiritual world, the witness is withdrawn, and therefore the Lord no longer knows. He knows, but there's no longer a need of this explicit agent, the super soul. Directly, Lord knows. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you so much. Text 28. Atmanam indriyartam cha param yadupyorapi satyasya upado vai puman pashyati nanyada. Translation: when the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires, and for that reason he becomes subjected to designations. But when one is in the transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. Purport: being covered by material desires, a spirit soul is also considered to be covered by designations belonging to a particular type of body. Thus he considers himself an animal, man, demigod, bird, beast, etc. In so many ways, he is influenced by false identification caused by false egotism, and being covered by illusory material desires, he distinguishes between matter and spirit. When one is devoid of such distinctions, there is no longer a difference between matter and spirit. At that time, the spirit is the only predominating factor. As long as one is covered by material desires, he thinks himself the master or the enjoyer. Thus he acts for sense gratification and becomes subjected to material pangs, happiness, and distress. But when one is freed from such a concept of life, he is no longer subjected to designations, and he envisions everything as spiritual in connection with the Supreme Lord. This is explained by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.255. Anakshaktasya vishyan yatharam upayanjataha nirbandha krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagyam uchyate. The liberated person has no attachment for anything material or for sense gratification. He understands that everything is connected with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that everything should be engaged in the service of the Lord. Therefore, he does not give up anything. There is no question of renouncing anything, because the Paramhamsas know how to engage everything in the service of the Lord. Originally, everything is spiritual, nothing is material. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 8.274, also it is explained that a Mahabhagavata, a highly advanced devotee, has no material vision. Stavara jangama dekhe na dekhe tara murti, sarvatra haye nija ishtadeva spruti. Although he sees trees, mountains, and other living entities moving here and there, he sees all as the creation of the Supreme Lord and, with reference to the context, sees only the Creator and not the created. In other words, he no longer distinguishes between the created and the Creator. He sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything. He sees Krishna in everything and everything in Krishna. This is oneness. Om Jnanantimirindasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So, today's local Bhagavatam class, we were talking about divinity, and we know, of course, Krishna is the supremely divine personality of Godhead, but how the Jiva Tattva in his original Krishna consciousness has these divine qualities too. Of course, we know that qualitatively we are one with Krishna, but not quantitatively, but for the fallen conditional soul, how far we are removed from such divine qualities only due to our endless material desires, that we've become a slave to that. So Jiva Tattvas can act conditionally or constitutionally. When you act conditionally, then you are under the jurisdiction of Maya and her spell. And I know all about uncontrolled senses and how the false ego dominates everything that I see, do, and act under. So Srila Prabhupada has talked about how these dualities and how not being situated on the transcendental platform of pure goodness, which is the platform on which all liberated souls, the Jiva Muktas are always situated on, then we can try to gradually, under the shelter of a guru, revive our original Krishna consciousness, and ultimately be able to have that vision that they have, where everything is seen in connection with Krishna. I was listening to a class by Srila Prabhupada where Srila Prabhupada corrected and said, although we know that there are three primary energies of Krishna, we know there's the internal and, of course, the marginal, all the jiva tattvas, and then the external energy, which is sometimes defined as inferior. But Srila Prabhupada said, actually, when everything is connected to Krishna's service, there is nothing inferior. Everything is completely spiritual. And so there's no distinction between, one is a superior energy of Krishna and one is an inferior. It's only when things become disconnected, people become disconnected from Krishna, not defining that as inferior. And Prahlad Maharaj had said in a verse, Krishna graha grahitatma na veda jagada idrisham. One who is Krishna conscious does not distinguish between things that are material or spiritual, because he takes everything to be related to Krishna. Therefore, everything is spiritual. Today, a devotee also said something quite interesting. They were saying locus, focus, hocus pocus. I thought that was quite funny. But then they said locus, meaning us, where we are. Once we start to practice devotional service, we become self-aware in the spiritual sense. We understand the locus. Who are we? Where are we right now? Why are we here? All these questions start to become answered. And then we become focused. We become focused on Krishna. We become so much focused on serving Krishna and his devotees. And then all the hocus pocus that these spells that Maya inflicts on us, they dissipate, they disappear. So I thought that was quite humorous, trying to remember the locus pocus and hocus pocus. Guru Maharaj, if you'd like to make some comments. Hare Krishna.
This is the vision of the Paramhansa. Yomam Pashyati Sarvatra Sarvam Shamai Pashyati. He sees Krishna in everything and everything in Krishna. He doesn't see anything separate from Krishna. Vasudeva Sarvamati, Krishna is everything. So he sees Krishna as Sarvatra Samadarshana. He sees the same Supreme Personality of Godhead everywhere. So this then, that Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur comments, the subtle body is in imposition on the jiva. That is the obstacle mentioned in the previous verse. When the subtle body exists, one sees that subtle body, and when that is absent, one sees Paramatma. That is explained in this verse. When the subtle body, ashaya, is an obstruction, upadhav, one sees the jiva covered by the subtle body as an enjoyer, atmanam. One sees objects of enjoyment, and one sees happiness and distress arising from that alone. If the subtle body is absent, then one sees Paramatma alone, na anyada. So sometimes we hear that the subtle body is always existing, but here the subtle body is destroyed. Still one has mind, intelligence, but they're the spiritual mind and spiritual intelligence, not the mind and intelligence contaminated by material desire and material modes of nature. So when that material subtle body is destroyed, then one's then one sees the Supreme Personality of Godhead unobstructed. In Bhagavad Gita, let me just see. Verse I'm thinking of. What is that verse? Prakashayati Tatparam. I think that's what I'm thinking. Maybe it's the end of. No, that's a different place. As it said, when one is, unusually I remember the English, when one is enlightened by the knowledge by which ignorance is destroyed, his knowledge illuminates everything, as everything is illuminated by the sun. Probably Praveen will give me that verse. So that kind of situation, instead of having a subtle body that obstructs our clear vision, one is enlightened with spiritual knowledge, so the material subtle body is destroyed, and one sees everything in the vision of Krishna consciousness. No, it's not Tesham Ivanukam Partam. It's a different verse. But that's also a good verse. Tesham Ivanukam Partam Amagyanajam Tamaha Nashyamya Pavasto Gyanadipena Bhasvatam. In the 10th chapter, the Lord says, when I'm merciful to the devotee always engaged in my service, then I destroy with the lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. That's also relevant, but not the verse I'm thinking of. So maybe it will still come. Hare Krishna.
So Guru Maharaj, when a Jiva Tattva, he can act conditionally or constitutionally, but until he can firmly be fixed on the transcendental platform, he's sort of fluctuating, sometimes sometime in the conditional state, or sometimes, serving Krishna. So that's a very painful situation to find oneself in too. Although Srila Prabhupada said one of the byproducts of bhakti is all miseries disappear, all material miseries disappear.
Therefore, too, the misery of the devotee who's unhappy because he's not fully Krishna conscious is nothing compared to the misery of the soul who's fully conditioned by material nature. That person is always shochati, kankshati, lamenting and hankering. But the Krishna conscious person is only sorry for the remnants of material attachment, material desire. But that's small compared to the mountains of lamentation and illusion suffered by the soul who's not Krishna conscious.
Well, we're at the top of the hour now, and I was wondering if the Ravali Devi Mataji would be available to lead the closing kirtan. It looks like she might not be available. And Getish Prabhuji, would you be available to read the closing kirtan?
Yes, I can. Namo Vishnu Pada
You're muted, Prabhuji.
Am I audible now?
Yes, good.
Oh. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Vishatarini Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Srivasadi Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Devam Vishwal Brahmanasya Prajacharya Ashtotra Shri 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 Bhakti Samshira Prabhupada Ki Jai Antamati Vaishnava Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Gaur Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakti Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopal Vinay Shyam Bharat Dhanu Vardhan Ki Jai Vrindan Mathura Dham Ki Jai Navdeep Mathura Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Gama Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samagayita Gaur Bhakti Ki Jai all assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga.
Maharaj Shri has posted that particular verse he was thinking of, Bhagavad Gita 5.16. Thank you so much to all the Vaishnavas for joining us in the class, especially to Maharaj Shri for giving us his association. His Holiness Jayādvaita Maharaj Shri Ki Jai.
Jai.
The Prabhupada Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol.